Collega's, ik dank u zeer voor uw vriendelijke uitnodiging. Vooral natuurlijk de organisatoren van de conferentie. Voor alles professores Van de Wege en Willard. And I'm also very happy to have heard Philip van Parijs, first time alive. I've read a lot of him and I was again impressed by his fundamental presentation. Het spijt me dat ik onvoldoende uw taal beheers. Ik kan Nederlands wel lezen, maar niet spreken of schrijven. Ik kan het vaak niet eens helemaal verstaan wanneer men snel spreekt. Voor een discussie in het Nederlands is mijn kennis dus helaas ontoereikend. Ik zal mijn lezing daarom in het Engels houden en ik gebruik een beetje Duits voor de PowerPoint-presentatie. Sorry. I have written down a lot of what I'm going to say because I thought for the Flemish especially, English is still to some extent a foreign language because they have to handle 3 or even 4 languages, 3 at least, I understand, and maybe English is not so familiar to them as it is for the Dutch. They are famous for that. Therefore, I have written down quite a bit of what I'm saying. It's a bit boring, maybe, but it's on the safe side. So you see the structure of my presentation. I'm talking about English and German at German universities especially, but I will draw parallels to the Dutch situation. There has been a growing awareness of the decline of German as an international language of science during the last decennia. And it has been noticed that there's a big difference between research and publications on the one hand versus teaching on the other hand. Then I will present quite a few data on the present state in teaching in English and in German at German universities, and at the end I will say something about language policy questions. So the concerns about choice of language for scientific communication in Germany or in the German-speaking countries, I sometimes speak only of Germany, but we have to think of other German-speaking countries too. They are related to the Dutch, to those in the Dutch-speaking countries, but more colored by the impression of the loss of international standing of German as a language of science. This has been quite a bitter awareness for many German scholars and scientists. The awareness of that loss began slowly in the 1960s. There were debates in the Bundestag, the German parliament, and there it was pointed out that German research, especially in the natural sciences, was still mentioned only in forewords in American studies. And at the same time, there was an intensive discussion in America herself about the abolishment of foreign language requirements. And the abolishment of foreign language requirements at American university is an important factor for the decline of other languages of science. Please let me know right away if you don't understand me. I'm not a very good speaker. I write a lot and I speak mainly to myself, and therefore I forget the audience sometimes. I'm sorry for that. Signal it right away if you don't understand me. Well, and there have been names for German as a language of science that it is only international still for certain niche subjects in the humanities and so forth. This was in the 1960s, 1980s. And there was also a concern about the limited resources for research and development in the German-speaking country as compared to the English-speaking countries. Like such data have been published that the overall resources or the overall money spent in Germany, Austria, and German-speaking Switzerland in the early 1990s was something above 80 80 billion US dollars, and in the USA, UK, and so forth together, it was nearly 6 times as much. These figures have been published in various places. There was also a difference, a wide awareness of differences between scientific subjects, especially between natural sciences on the one hand and other sciences, and scholarships and subjects on the other hand. This graph, which I produced a few years ago, has been published quite often. It pictures the share of languages in publications in the natural sciences over the time span from 1880 to 2005. And you see the red line represents the share of English publications in English. The other lines, the shares in other languages, and you see the decline of German, French, and after a short rise also of Russian. German and French declined after World War I, which was largely due to the fact that the countries were economically ruined during the war, and the United States escaped unscathed, so to speak, and could invest in research and development. But you see the difference is spectacular. And it has also been recorded in more detail when the main shift occurred from German to English in various subjects. Here for biology and mathematics. You see here of the international biggest abstract services, bibliographies, what the share of contributions in German was from German-speaking scientists and from English-speaking scientists, and in mathematics, biology. And you see that the share of contributions in English rose, not so spectacularly in both cases, but the share of contributions in German rose spectacularly in biology from 1992 to 1995, and in mathematics gradually, but also spectacularly in the course of the years. And of course, this is due to the fact that the other scientists of other languages left German and went over to English. They didn't publish in German anymore. All publications were only produced by the German-speaking scientists. But this was pretty late, not so long ago actually, that this great shift occurred. And also change in the languages of journals was quite spectacular. Here a few cases, there could be even hundreds of such examples given, where German journals published in Germany or German-speaking countries shifted their language publication from German to English, also changed the title of the journal into English. It's a bit less dramatic in the social sciences. Here you have to be aware of the fact that the ordinate is logarithmic, otherwise the lines would be too far apart. English also is way ahead, as you see the red line, but if you go at the year 2005, you see that French and German still play a certain role at 6 or 7% of global publications, according to the most representative abstract service and bibliographies. So they do still play a certain role, internationally even. And this shows in various empirical data. Here is one example. The International Association of International Sociological Association, ISA, that's it, yeah? Made a survey of its members towards the end of the last century, which books were the most influential, according to their view, in sociology during the last century. And they came out with this list of books. And I've underlined those which were not published in English first, but either in German or in French first. Half of them were published in English first, but the other languages, English or French, were represented quite strongly still in this survey. And I talked personally to Mr. Wallerstein, who was the president of the ISA at that time, what his consequences were. And he said, well, we should go for French and German as official languages of the ISA, but the German scholars did not really support him. That was the main reason why German did not become an official language, but French and Spanish later on did, in addition to English. Now, there are niche subjects of German as an international scientific language only in the humanities, like some philologies, archaeologies, and especially in German language, literature, and culture, where you can still hear German at international conferences and where scholars still learn the language for scientific reasons. There has also been the awareness there's a big difference between research and publications on the one hand and teaching on the other hand. The following discrepancies became salient in the 1990s. German scientists' language of publication was often very different from language of teaching. And in teaching, written teaching materials were quite common, but teaching otherwise happened in German. And there was also awareness of the fact that foreign students who flocked to Germany were not so familiar with German anymore than they had been formerly. As a consequence, the German Academic Exchange Service started to support international study programs taught in English beginning in the winter semester 1997-98. Now, I've written an extensive book on that thing, it appeared in 1998. Problems which I highlighted and others highlighted, problems with the introduction of English, or if English became either co-equal or even the dominant language of teaching, which were pointed out, were the following. They were discussed, but mostly they were discarded after a while as being not so important or being exaggerated. Well, I here list 5 problems of the 10 which I've listed elsewhere. Undermining the national identity of Germany as a nation based on its language. Germany was, in fact, based on its language. German unification occurred on the common language of first over 300 small states and later 36 states. And those came together which had German as their main language. Then was also discussed loss of cognitive resources if one works monolingually, but this was not really taken seriously. I will get back to that later. If science was only done in English, it was argued it was less inspirational or less productive than if several languages were employed. Then a more serious question was undermining departments of German as a foreign language, especially those abroad. If one could study at German universities in English only, then why should one still learn German if one goes to Germany? And when universities' communicative barrier to public, the Ivy Tower has been an old metaphor of the German universities, but if they teach in English, the Ivy Tower would still grow higher than it was before. And then German scientists, language burden and long-lasting linguistic disadvantage vis-à-vis Anglophones, which also is still taken seriously. There have been vehement objections against teaching in English by language-cultivating organizations, by Germanists also, and especially by teachers of German as a foreign language, with metaphors picturing the tendency, metaphors like avalanche, Catherine wheel, stampede, or cascade to English. While these metaphors, especially the latter, express the fears of the Verein Deutsche Sprache, founded in 1997, originally named Verein zur Wahrung der deutschen Sprache, for the preservation of the German language. The metaphors ignore the fact that the shift to English is the non-Anglophone's own choice, though under pressure. Now, this is the cataract image, or the cataract metaphor. First, English is introduced into universities, then to prepare students for the universities and the higher levels of schools, then the lower level of schools, and so finally in the families who are very ambitious. They start teaching English to their children and the families, and the German language community will be dissolved. Now, the present state of teaching in English and in German at German universities, a few data, therefore. Well, first, a Europe-wide overview by Bernd Wächter and Friedhelm Mayworm. They write, English-taught programs have spread all over Europe. However, they remain very unevenly distributed over countries. The Alps still are an ETP watershed. The ETP leaders remain the Netherlands, together with Europe's Nordic countries. Germany, France, and Central Western Europe are in the midfield. In the southern parts of Europe, ETPs are few. Of course, for the Dutch, English is much easier than for the English, for the Italians, for the Italians or the French, according to the structure of the language. And the Dutch also in a different situation because their language hasn't been an international language to the same extent. Recently, formally it has, of course, Dutch countries were a world power in the 17th century, of course, on the same status as the English-speaking countries, but for the Germans, it's different. They still remember that German has been a big international language, so attitudes are different. In Germany, English is particularly popular in private universities, which are legally quite free in their choice of language of teaching. All of them, 100 about, or 420, are new, small, and they ask for high tuition fees, which they can afford because they teach in English. Students save costs for learning German if they go there, and or acquire skills in the more valuable language, English. Then German prevails in the traditional state universities, which have restrictions on English as the language of teaching. They are bigger and ask for no tuition fees. For them, the Conference of the University of Vice Presidents and the Federal Cultural Ministers has specified that German language skills should, as a rule, be required for regular full-time studies. This implies that German should be one of the languages of teaching. For admission to full-time studies, 8 semesters or more, the minimum requirement is, as a rule, level C1 of the general European framework to be certified by various tests. At state universities, teaching in English is therefore largely limited to single, mostly non-obligatory courses, except in studies of English language and literature, and to postgraduate studies. Same has been reported by Johan van Hoort, and whom I haven't seen here. He has published an article on that recently. He reports the same for Flanders. Now, English is, however, nearly always one of the languages of teaching in international study programs offered at state and at private universities. The German Academic Exchange Service estimates their total number at German universities now at over 1,700, but comprising only about 5% of total student enrollment. Now, finally, language policy questions. Any recommendations as to language choice or policy should be aware of the gaps in empirical knowledge. The limited knowledge of social and political social and political laws, if one wants to call them that, and consequently the likely neglect or miscalculation of possible side effects. One should be aware of that. One should also consider divergent interests, values, and ideologies, e.g. the more language-oriented versus the more economic or technical, and the more national versus the more cosmopolitical leaning, ideological differences which are important. Such differences became palpable in the divergent views on the quality of teaching and learning in international study programs, which seem to be more severe by distant observers and by those dealing with language issues and politics in general, and multilingualism in particular, than by the practitioners on the ground who appear to have developed a higher degree of language pain tolerance, especially towards non-native speakers. So the practitioners don't see so many problems, but theoreticians see the problems much more severely. And of course, theoreticians with a certain ideological leaning. The paper of the German Conference of University Vice Presidents and the Federal Cultural Minister is, because of the participation of the latter of the cultural ministers, not only a toothless recommendation, but it can still be modified by any of the 16 federal states. That's what this paper says itself. It says in paragraph 1.2, der Nachweis der Sprachkenntnisse ist je nach Landesrecht eine Voraussetzung für die Zulassung oder Einschreibung zum Studium. Which knowledge of German is required, but different countries can modify it according to their standards or ideas. The federal structure of Germany guarantees some cultural autonomy to each federal state. That's also in the Constitution, in the Grundgesetz. It says there, hat der Bund von seiner Gesetzgebungszuständigkeit Gebrauch gemacht, können die Länder durch Gesetz hiervon abweichende Regelungen treffen. There are then 6 or 8 points listed, and 6 is die Hochschulzulassung und die Hochschulabschlüsse. It means the different states can make special regulations. So North Rhine-Westphalia has a special regulation for universities who are in partnership with a foreign university. They may use English instead of German for admission to the universities. It is hard to acquire enough German to study at a German university. The requirements are hard. Here it says you have to study a full year. That's basically what it boils down. You have to study some 1,000 Unterrichtsstunden with preparations, and you have to pay some 5,000 to 10,000 euros tuition fees. It seems unclear whether German language policy planners are content with the number of foreign students studying at German universities under these conditions, especially the requirements of learning German. With over 300,000 foreign students, Germany ranks 3rd or 4th globally in number of foreign students. There are, on the one hand, complaints, especially from students at private universities, about the lack of opportunities for learning German. And there is, on the other hand, a tendency to expand teaching in English at private universities. Now, a new resolution of the HAK even recommends that every employee at universities should be able to speak English, so the universities open up for English more than they did before, as part of the Willkommenskultur. Well, and on the other hand, English is clearly valued more highly than German in various comments on the languages. There is the concern that German will not be studied very much abroad anymore as a foreign language, but figures go into another direction. A number of learners of German as a foreign language have risen lately, considerably even. And this is partially due to the economic situation. Here, one example of the economic situation: youth unemployment in Europe. Germany has by far the fewest, and some 2 million positions cannot be filled because there are not enough people. So Spaniards, Italians, and so forth flock to Germany. Berlin is the city with strongest influx of foreigners, and they learn German there, of course. So learning German still remains attractive, learning German as a foreign language, and therefore concern that teaching part of the courses in English in Germany seems to be exaggerated. Well, perhaps one last thing. It is a bit unclear Well, maybe one other thing I should say. English is clearly seen not as a fair lingua franca. At the bottom it is, as I call it, a pseudo-lingua franca because it has so many native speakers. It can, of course, be democratized more than it is now. This is also a widespread view, but at the moment English is not seen as a fair lingua franca. And, well, a short look back, that American and British Association for the Advancement of Science made a move in 1921 to consider Esperanto as the global language, and they argued the acceptance of any modern national language would confer undue advantages and excite jealousy. Therefore, an invented language is best. Just to let you know that this has been once a move by the English-speaking scientific associations. Well, there seems to be a widespread feeling that stricter centralized regulations might cause more problems than leaving decisions to individual institutions. For finding a balance of enough English on the one hand, as well as enough German on the other hand. That might be maybe decided more reasonably by individual institutions than by general recommendations. A question hardly discussed is the continued use of other international languages along English. Should, for example, Germany or other countries continue to support French for certain studies, for studies other than French, or respectively France or other countries, should they support German? Are there still sufficiently important niche subjects for international languages other than English? Well, a final sentence maybe. To meet the divergent interests as to languages for scientific communication seems to be similarly intricate as regulating financial or commodity markets. But it would be an oversimplification to treat languages as just another commodity because of the specific sum total of their communicative, cognitive, and identificatory functions. Well, thank you very much, and I'm sorry that I put in a bit too much, but maybe it's still a basis for some thoughts. Thank you.